All right, on that very, very special note, I've got a very special guest talking to us right here on ET Now. As the government completes 4 years in office, fuel seems to be the one issue that's plaguing sentiment right now. And who better than the NITI Aayog Vice Chairman, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, joining us live right here on the show this evening. Thanks very much, sir, for being with us. I have to start with you on really the burning issue of the day, and that seems to be fuel pricing. That seems to be very high fuel prices. 7th consecutive increase in fuel prices has a lot of people worried. And while we at ET Now support the move to decontrol pricing, we don't believe that any part of the government or OMCs need to cushion the consumer. Do you agree that perhaps there is a need to revise the tax structure? There's a need to review the excise duty on petroleum. And is that at all under consideration? The minister did say there will be a solution soon. That was vague. I'm just wondering, what kind of a solution will that be? Is there a case to cut excise duty?
Supriya, I'm glad to hear the minister saying that there will be a solution soon, and that will be directed towards bringing some relief to the consumer. But you know, as an economist, I have to sort of look at whether we have the fiscal space in our revenues at the moment. We have in the back, to accommodate that, because if there isn't a fiscal space, then this will deteriorate our fiscal deficit, and then that has its own multiple impact going forward. Now, the good news here is that we have shifted from the accrual to the cash accounting system. And that the direct implication of that is that in 2018-19, we will collect GST revenues of 13 months, as we did for only 11 months in 2017-18. Now, that should bring to the central kitty at least about 50,000 crore or 55,000 crore, as its share, because if April figures you have to go by, lakh of crore of GST collection, then that would be the center's share. And this will, I think, everybody predicts and says that this will only improve as we go forward, as more and more, more and more businesses get registered under the GST. So, I while recognizing that a cut of 1 rupee excise duty cut of 1 rupee leads to about 12,000 crore or so of revenue loss. This there is this extra space that we can use. The other thing is, of course, that we have to act more aggressively, perhaps, on creating some fiscal space, by further disinvestment or selling off our, monetizing our highway assets or airport assets, and generating some revenues there. So, I think there is as an economist, I feel a bit confident at the moment to say that yes, if the minister does want to bring consumer relief to the consumers, he will not be disturbing my friends in the North Bloc, who are of course concerned about the fiscal deficit impact of this move.
Oh, that's extremely important. I think that should be music to the ears of a lot of consumers out there, that at least there could be an additional fiscal space to do so. And that's precisely the question, because there are a lot of naysayers out there who believe that where is the fiscal space, and given that GST collections have been fluctuating, the reality is that consumers were not the sole beneficiaries when prices did go down substantially to about $30 a barrel. And money was used to meet fiscal targets, money was used for infrastructure. Why should there not be given some sort of a cushion, some sort of a respite? But I'm glad to hear that you believe there is fiscal space. Is there though consensus in the center on the needs to bring petroleum products under the GST? Many people believe that's the easiest solution to go to. You just bring petroleum under the GST and it's all going to be all right. But I think at one level it's a little foolhardy, because collections are fluctuating. This is a big revenue earner. How tough is this going to be? This is perhaps a very straight-jacketed argument that's being put on the table. Am I right there?
Yeah, I think you're right, because you see, Supriya, bringing the GST and bringing the petroleum products under the GST has zero impact on the tax collection, because the same taxes would be collected, except of course that our exporters will get the benefit of the input credit, that they have, which is the tax they have paid on the energy supplies. So, not just the petroleum, but also power and which is electricity supplies should come under the GST, simply to make our businesses globally competitive. Now, this unfortunately, if you like, will not impact the final consumer also, because he or she does not get any input credit when you and I consume petroleum products with electricity. So, that is a separate argument, and I think there is a complete consensus within the center, as far as I can see, on doing this. It is the states which are, I think, dragging their feet, because a lot of them are dependent on petroleum revenues, and also some of the duties that they charge on electricity for revenue as revenue sources. Now, my take to them is that as your revenues are rising because of the buoyancy in the GST, as also the buoyancy in the direct taxes, and I think this is the time to give up this one and bring the two under the GST as soon as possible, because otherwise the businesses locate all over the country will stand to lose because of loss of competitiveness. So, I think the sooner that is done, the better it is. And I had heard the finance minister say very clearly that the center would quite like these products, all energy related products, to be brought under GST as soon as possible.
And that's putting it rather well, that there's an input tax credit angle to also look at. But Dr. Kumar, I do want to talk about the macro picture, because thanks to the rising crude prices, the macro picture isn't looking as strong as before. The rupee has depreciated close to 6%. This year, economists expect the current account deficit to cross the 2.5% mark of the GDP. Now, how worried are you on account of all of this as far as the state of the economy is concerned?
Yeah, on the rupee depreciation, I am not worried at all. I'm completely unworried, if you like. In fact, I have been one of those who have believed that a rupee which is not overvalued in real effective exchange rate terms, and I believe the rupee had been overvalued by about 12%. So therefore, I am not worried on that. In fact, this will be a good signal, a good impetus to our exports, which need a lot of picking up, even now. But also, a depreciated rupee would mean, as it has done, higher fuel prices, and so therefore you do get some some substitution there, or some efficiencies there, if you like, and it has a price effect. So there is nothing wrong. There is no harm. It's totally positive. On the inflation bit also, I think the last figure that I saw was the headline consumer inflation being still at about 4.13 or 4.23%, which is the midpoint of between 2 to 6. So I would assume that the RBI would take that as not a sort of a danger sign, or not something to be not something to get get hyperactive on that. And finally, on the current account deficit, yes, 2.5% of GDP is getting worrisome, but thankfully we have enough portfolio flows and capital inflows to continue to build our reserves, which are now quite healthy. So there is there is not a situation at the moment that that we think of the external account getting completely out of kilter. Now, the key, however, must be to promote and expand and accelerate the export of both our goods and services, as also to encourage tourism in our country. Now, that's something that we need to focus very sharply on. There are probably nitty-gritty measures that we need to get into, whether it is logistics, or it's infrastructure, or it is access to commercial credit for small and medium enterprises, or it is to make sure that all the pain that had been that had come by the way of the twin movements of the demonetization and the GST on our exporters is removed as soon as possible. And I especially refer here to the reimbursement of export on the exporters for all the taxes they have paid. So we must focus very quickly on our external sector receipts, because that's the way forward, and not any sort of drastic measure on one of the macroeconomic parameters, which would only bring further hurt to the economy.
Dr. Kumar, I was going to ask you this later, but you tempted me to go straight to the RBI then. Now, given the hawkish tone of the MPC, while you believe that the RBI should not act in haste and 4.2 is the middle range, it's 4% for them, nothing between 2 to 6. So, the hawkish tone that one has seen in the MPC and the rising crude oil prices that we are seeing now, the street seems to be betting on a rate hike soon, and some believe it could happen by as early as June itself. Is there enough ground for rates to go up? And my question largely is, while you believe there isn't, what sort of an impact will a rate hike have on the recovery process that seems to be underway?
You know, given the bond prices where they are, I think now the transmission would be much quicker than what it has been in the past. So, the fact is that a rate hike at this point of time would convert itself very quickly into higher lending rates. Also because I believe there is a, the liquidity is no longer is flush, and we are getting into a tight liquidity situation. So that any rate hike at this time by the RBI would be transmitted quickly throughout the system, and that will of course hurt the recovery, because as you know, the banks major lending has been to major expansion has been on retail lending, which is the housing loans and the loans to the for capital goods, autos particularly, and there the EMIs will tend to go up right away, and that will curb that incipient recovery that we are beginning to see in the housing sector, which is very important because of its multiplier effects for the rest of the economy and for economic growth. So, RBI should look at its inflationary expectation surveys rather carefully. I know that the core inflation minus fuel and food is not looking so good, but I am hoping that the RBI would look at would look at the inflationary expectations, and they will probably find that there is no reason to believe that inflationary expectations are getting entrenched, and if they are not, then this is not the right time, because the food prices will come down as we approach the monsoon, and this is very transitory. And I am hoping also, Suparna, that Supriya, that with the now oil going above 70-75, there must be a bigger shale oil response from the US, and which will in some sense moderate, which must moderate this Saudi Arabia Russia deal of keeping prices where they are, and this and I think this should therefore not become a new benchmark when the shale oil kicks in at this point of time. So, given all of that, given that the fuel and food are both not sort of permanent there,
yes,
I would hope that RBI will take a very considered view before hiking the rates.
Indeed. So, that's the RBI pitch from you, but I want to quickly talk about the fiscal deficit target of 3.3%, and you've perhaps laid the ground for it by saying that there is an additional elbow space that the government perhaps will have without disturbing the fisc to perhaps cut excise duties, because I remember when it was done by 2 rupees per litre on petrol and diesel in October, the estimates were ranging between 26,000 crore rupee revenue loss to the government. You yourself believe a 1 rupee cut will perhaps lead to 12 to 13. My view also, and my question also on that, is the MSP hikes will also start pinching, and at some point the government perhaps will have to give some relief. You are confident that by giving the relief, the fisc will be under pressure, right?
By giving the relief on the excise duties, as I said, yes, there is, in my view, enough fiscal space already, and that there is room for much more pointed and focused action on improving the non-tax revenues on part of the government. And I think this should be done now, and there are proposals for it already, and I am hoping that this action for raising, for example, the Suti holdings of the government, I see no reason at all for the government not to liquidate them at this point of time. So I mean, so I am merely saying, yes, if you want to bring relief to the consumers, you have to make the fiscal adjustment for it, but luckily for us, there is fiscal space available, and also some of our actions can generate additional revenues, which will leave the fiscal target right intact and cause no slippage whatsoever. And also please remember that we are having some unprecedented buoyancy in our tax collections, both on the direct and indirect tax side. So we should in some sense factor that in at this point of time when making these decisions or planning or designing the package that the Petroleum Minister hinted at.
All right, very quickly, sir, a last question to you, and this is more on the structural, the big picture really. Structurally, is the economy in a better place than it was a year ago? The recent high-frequency economic indicators suggest economic growth perhaps is gradually improving. You've got the commercial vehicle sales, the steel output, the cement output, tourist arrivals, etc. have shown improved growth. Now, in a sense, is the next 1 year going to be a tug of war year between the good micro and the tough macro?
Yeah, well put, Supriya. But I think the good micro is the one to really go for and look after, and also to reinforce it and strengthen it, because at the end of the day, it is the real economy and the supply side response which will bring us joy and benefit. And I think this real, and the macros in some sense will take care of themselves if we make sure that our supply side response is robust, if we make our medium, small and medium and small enterprises much more dynamic, if we can help them regain their dynamism which they are now raring to go, if we can improve our affordable housing allocations and programs so that we can generate those multiplier effects, if we can then modernize and improve our agriculture productivity and yields as we go forward. So it is very much the micro aspects which need care and which need nurturing at this point in time. After all, there used to be this wonderful thing called the micro foundations of macroeconomy, and that course by Lehonofood I think now needs to be read by all of us in the government.
What's the deadline? All right, a quick last question, and the first of the dirty dozen in the IBC has been resolved. According to you, has this finally taken off? Is it finally working? And can the 1 lakh crore figure be resolved by the IBC immediately as the deadline looms large? Because the Tata Bhushan perhaps is the first test case, and it's been a sweet experience after all.
No, I'm thrilled to see this insolvency and bankruptcy code now finally in action. This is a historical change, by the way. It has never been done before, and I am quite confident that the 1 lakh crore limit, the 1 lakh crore target will be met, because it is the initial teething trouble, and we are getting over it, and people are now going to get much more faith in the process, and people are also learning all the time as to what to do and how best to go about it. So I think the IBC is done very well, and the Commission has done very well under Sahu, and so I think we will see much better results and much more joy going forward.
All right. On that note, sir, thank you very, very much for joining us right here on ET Now. That's Dr. Rajiv Kumar, the Vice Chair of NITI Aayog, joining us on the For Your Report card.
Thanks, Supriya. Thank you.
I think the good news from Dr. Kumar really is, thank you very much, sir. The good news from Dr. Kumar really is that there is perhaps fiscal space for the government to bring in some sort of a respite for consumers reeling under the high fuel prices. That's the big news right here on ET Now. We take a quick breather, completely out of time on this edition. We come back and track more news, views and analysis right here on this channel.